So just before the video starts, I wanted to give a quick shout out to what is quite possibly the most apt sponsorship I've ever come across for Vivec. Oftentimes I'll decline, 99.9% of sponsorship deals I come across because I just don't think Raid Shadow Legends is very appropriate for the sort of content on this channel. But I know a lot of you like to fall asleep to these report videos, and that's why I thought these COZYSNUG sleep earbuds from LYTMI really are a match made in heaven for this channel and its viewers. If you're anything like me, you might struggle falling to sleep on your back with conventional earbuds in. I'd always wondered whether there were any designs that facilitated side sleeping without waking up with a perforated eardrum. Not only do these earbuds work wonders for side sleepers, they boast high quality audio, are super lightweight and soft with various different sizes of ear wings to pick and choose from, on top of having 21 hours of charge when using the charging case. So, now you can all quickly and smoothly fall asleep listening to me recount the usual litany of mind-bending, reality-shattering experiences that we all know and love. If you're interested, please check out the link in the description, and don't forget to use the discount code VIVEC for 10% off your order. Anyway, we'll crack on with the video now, but be sure to let me know what you thought of the earbuds if you do end up snatching yourself a pair, and thank you to LYTMI for reaching out, I really appreciate it. Face of a Goddess. A Salvia Divinorum at 20x and 60x trip report by Jeebus Black. Posted to EARBUDS.org April 24th, 2012. During the early hours of December 14th, 2007, I went on 2 trips into Salvia space by way of 2 different extracts. The first being 20x, the second a much more powerful force of 60x that I hadn't experienced before. The plan, carried out, was to have a brief stint into Salvia space with 20x, testing the waters so to speak, and within the hour of come down, take a trip with 60x. My testing the waters with 20x was a nice trip, starting by me taking a nice large drag from the bong, lighting the salvia with flame most of the time until all I saw left was fine grey ash, then holding and exhaling after about 20 to 30 seconds, quickly putting the bong and lighter down, and laying back. I left my eyes open for much of the trip, and not having taken enough to truly encompass my senses, was awarded only a brief stint into the rotating kaleidoscopic image of faces continuously opening their mouths beyond the normal limits, exposing a black abyss beyond. From my perspective, the faces were quite enormous, and towards the end of the trip, the primary visuals of the trip formed into the ceiling fan of the room, the fan blades being the abyssal opening mouths, the golden arms attaching to the fan motor emerging from what was white teeth, the centre being the kaleidoscopic collage of faces. I was slowly eased out of the trip. Audio hallucination consisted of the background repeated statement, "I can't find the password," over and over again, in the muffled speech pattern of a male. Looking over to my sitter, I saw him smirk just slightly, and began laughing as if in response to something quite funny. Calming down, I looked over to him again, and he looked up at the wall behind me very briefly, which made the still not so cognitive me find something hilarious on the wall, and began laughing too. At this point, I'm relatively sure I hallucinated a ceiling daisy-shaped screw thing on the wall. Just one, which I thought was the course of the humour. This trip wasn't like that of the previous trips, where the laughter felt plastic and fake, but it actually felt genuine, like my first real trip with this drug. After calming down, I, sitting up, and still on the trip, began to explain to my sitter the specifics of my trip. We conversed for a while, and my sitter eventually got up to leave the room, but first quickly flicked the lights in the room on and off. Experienced with Salvia as he is, he knew what he was doing. And this provided my world an explosion of small, round kaleidoscopes of faces, in place of the after images of the room. To be honest, it was quite an interesting effect. Between my 2 trips, my sitter had a go with 20x. From my trip to after his trip and come down, we apparently experienced a bit of time dissociation, as we found we had gone an hour, and thought it had been a fair bit less of time. It's weird that we'd taken Salvia at different times but still had the same time issue strike us. My blasting off into Salvia space with 60x was awesome. I took a massive drag from the bong, and held it probably not as long as I should have, perhaps 15 to 25 seconds. While holding in the first drag, I set the lighter down on the nightstand next to the bed, knowing this stuff was going to strike fast. Exhaling, I took in what was left in the chamber, observing the bit of salvia still burning, a glow bright before extinguishing, and being replaced by fine white ash. I went to put the bong down on the nightstand. This is where the memory gap begins, filled by the sitter. I failed to have the bong reach the surface of the stand, instead dropping it to the floor in transit. I abruptly lay back and had a little blackout time. I sat up, and this is the end of the memory gap. As I understand it now, my consciousness fought to remain out of the trip. I pulled at the blankets beneath me and began sliding one leg off of the bed, when a break in the stormy mind of me brought a bit of cognitive stability, and I made the realization that I was unintentionally fighting the trip by keeping open my eyes. Closing my eyes, I began to have a small bit of hallucination. The problem that arose in this situation, though, and which I now realise has always been an issue with me and my trips, was that I didn't really trust my senses, in that I was questioning as to whether or not I was actually hallucinating, or, which doesn't seem logical due to my having known I had just taken a drug, either seeing after images of light from when my eyes were open, and I quickly shut my eyes, or experiencing a runaway imagination. After letting go of the question and forcefully mentally telling myself it was the drug and not my imagination, I drifted into seeing some quite interesting visuals, consisting of the normal kaleidoscope of open-mouthed faces of quite a large size. But the evolution of this trip was a panning out from these specific faces, to include thousands of faces, revolving in place. And in general, they were being perceived as a giant plane that had the ability to change form as if like a piece of pin art, where each pin sits at a specific elevation to mimic almost any form pressed into it. Each kaleidoscopic image represented a pinhead, and as one, they all rippled and changed. In a significant part of the trip, the pin art lookalike plane of kaleidoscopic faces pushed upwards and created the image of a smiling female face. I mark this as a significant part of the trip. It was quite detailed and rather pleasant to see. In approximately the same instance, a wave rippled over the smiling face. The wave wasn't so much from a changing elevation of the pin art-like plane, but from the kaleidoscopes of faces individually flipping in place, revealing a second side to them, devoid of colour, unlike the other sides of the small images which were yellow, tan, and brown. Unlike the refracted kaleidoscope facial images, this part of the trip had a more natural feel to it. I think it's odd to say in light of the grayscale imagery I experienced at that moment, but it had less of a mechanical feel about it. It was at this point I was about 50% cognitive and was voicing my opinions of the trip as it had so progressed to my sitter, attempting to convey the extreme intensity and power of the trip, and, of course, what I could do at that time and see, although I hadn't quite processed all the imagery myself at the time. By this time, I was firmly pressing my hands against my eyes, as one would press against the glass of a window for a better view. The mental scene changed imagery past this point into the trip to an overhead view of parallel pillars still composed of fractal faces. The overhead view was a moving one, going in between the pillars at a high distance, and made for quite an interesting effect. My trip sitter thought it prudent at this point to speak. He had obviously understood by now I was mostly cognitive, and I wasn't going to have a bad reaction to his voice. He asked me if he could say something. His voice altered my visuals in such a way as to produce one pillar in my vision moving independently of the others having themselves not been moving in the first place, and unlike the others, composed of a great many white daisies. Of course, I told him he could say something, an attempt on my part to recreate the variable that which had effect on my visuals, and he proceeded to do something to the extent of saying, "Hi, Stephen," which I can't recall having done anything profound to the visuals at that point. The visuals eventually began to fade, and I gave up on holding my eyes shut, instead recapping to my sitter what had happened. Throughout the trip, there was no true audio hallucinations, more like a feeling of pressure on my ears with perhaps a steady deep background noise. In all, the main part of the trip lasted 15 minutes, which was an oddity by itself considering I often have trips as short as 3 minutes, to usually as long as maybe 6. The come down afterwards was a brief half an hour, and was a rather euphoric and happy time for me, definitely a result of the drug. All in all, it was an intensely powerful trip that, in recap, was one of the most pleasant I've actually been through. I learnt this trip through that my rating system of trips had been previously wrong, a scale of 1 through 6 as described on the internet, and that while most of this trip would have been considered a 3 on said scale, closed-eyed visuals, not so much so regarding open-eyed. It was more powerful than anything from before it. I learned, abiding by this system, only can hold myself back, and that when blasting off to Salvia space, I should simply let go and close my eyes, not looking for total open-eyed immersion that I've experienced before. Additionally, I came to understand that my questioning whether the trip is actually a hallucination, or whether or not it was my imagination run wild, was an example of fighting my trip, and that it too only holds me back. I need to accept better, and not reject so readily. Overall, an awesome experience. Probably one of the more generally positive experiences we've shared regarding Salvia Divinorum. So before we actually analyse the trip itself, I'd just like to give a brief overview of Salvia Divinorum and Salvinorin A, the active chemical in salvia that produces the effects. So this is from Psychonaut Wiki. If you would like to read the actual post, then please go and check it out. It's a great resource. So, Salvia Divinorum. A trip sitter is recommended with this substance that often is smoked in heavy doses. Short-acting, intense trips may cause mental and physical side effects days after the hit has been taken. The overwhelming effects often require post-processing. It may take 2 days before physical side effects become noticeable, like a shift in hearing. Using additional substances without a break, 2 days plus few days to recover if you notice any side effects, increases the risk to get a bad post-trip. Salvia Divinorum, also called Diviner's Sage, Scarmaria pastora, Seer's Sage, and Salvia, is a psychoactive plant in the Salvia genus. Its native habitat is within cloud forest in the isolated Sierra Mazateca of Oaxaca. Is it Oaxaca? Yeah, I believe so. It's in Mexico, basically, where it grows in shady and moist locations. The plant grows to over 1 meter high and has a hollow square stem, large leaves, and occasional white flowers with violet calyxes. The main psychoactive compound in the plant is Salvinorin A, which can also be found in lower quantities in Salvia recognita and Salvia glutinosa. A 2019 large-scale study found that ketamine, Salvia Divinorum, and DMT, and other classical psychedelic substances, are linked to near-death experiences. This is quite interesting here as well. People. Daniel Siebert has studied Salvia Divinorum for over 20 years and was the first person to unequivocally identify, by human bioassays in 1993, Salvinorin A as the primary psychoactive substance of Salvia Divinorum. Salvinorin A is the main active psychoactive molecule within Salvia Divinorum, a Mexican plant which has a long history of uses as an entheogen by indigenous Mazatec shamans. It is structurally distinct from other naturally occurring hallucinogens, such as DMT, psilocin, and mescaline, because it contains no nitrogen atoms, making it a terpenoid and not an alkaloid as is the norm. This means it cannot be rendered as a salt. It also differs in subjective experience compared to other hallucinogens, and has been described as an atypical psychedelic, although this formal classification is debatable. See, this is the ever-present debate that pervades the whole salvia culture and psychonautic enthusiast club. What is salvia? Is it a dissociative? Is it a psychedelic? On Psychonaut Wiki, it's classed as a hallucinogen, which is quite a broad term. So yeah, it's really fascinating, salvia, because it has almost elements of all the hallucinogens. It's got levels of dissociation, it has psychedelic visuals, it even has some like delirium level properties to it. It really is just a beast in and of itself. Quite possibly the wackiest of all the hallucinogens in my opinion. It really is only for the most veteran of psychonauts, and like I've said before in my commentary regarding salvia, you just don't know what you're going to get with this stuff. It could either be the most beautiful, enlightening experience of your entire life, or it could literally induce PTSD and scare you from psychedelics forever and produce HPPD, unground you from reality, and a load of other nasty effects. But it must be said, a bit like Amanita muscaria, which has its own sort of dangers and risks associated with it, especially in terms of toxicity in regards to Amanita, that there are positive experiences to be had from these more risque substances, like Amanita and Salvinorin A. They're not so destructive like deliriants. I'd say steer clear from Datura, deliriants, Benadryl. That just just fucking don't do them, basically. But for Salvia and Amanita, I cannot personally deny that they have beautifully transcendent qualities to them that can really shape your life. And for veteran psychonauts who really love going beyond, this is really a match made in heaven for them. But you still need to exhibit the typical safety protocols that you would with any psychedelic, if not even more so, because of, again, the risk that comes with messing with something that is so unpredictable and is so relative, based upon your genetics, just your level of consciousness and psychological development and how much experience you've had with altered states. There's a lot more variables going on with Amanita and Salvia. But yeah, I've spoken about this before. I have actually tried Salvia. It was the second hallucinogenic I ever tried. I mean, if you consider weed a hallucinogenic, I do. I mean, I consider it's a psychoactive substance. It was the first, but Salvia was the first hallucinogenic I ever tried. I don't know what it was. It might have been like 15x. Just had literal one. I had like 1 or 2 blasts on it. I didn't have enough to actually hallucinate properly, but I remember on the second blast having perceived the amount of people. If you're a heavy Vivec listener, the amount of times you've heard me say this must be crazy, but I like to mention it because I know that not everyone watches all the videos. So I just perceived my cone of reality, my perception, my visual field, literally sort of flip and become bird's eye, even just flat. It was like you were playing an isometric video game, and I just could not move. I was absolutely couch locked, and it was quite insane because it really was the first time I'd ever actually experienced something so beyond my own state of consciousness that wasn't weed or alcohol. It was the first time I ever hallucinated. There was an interesting element to this trip where the guy says that when he let go of the idea of his imagination running wild and just let the drug take hold, that the experience actually turned a lot more positive. It's something that's actually quite common between a lot of trip reports, where people sort of do get a bit lost in their own head and they can forget that I am literally on a drug. So sometimes you just got to let the chemical do its bit, do some bits on your neurons, let it take action and see where it takes you. But in another sense, the metaphysical quality of psychedelics and hallucinogens is your imagination running wild in a sense. But yeah, it's an interesting conundrum. Because sometimes if you let your imagination run wild, you can start imagining fucking demons coming out your walls and all sorts of crazy stuff. Someone messaged me the other day. If they watch my content, they'll know who it is. They mentioned that they had taken MDMA and then they'd had some ketamine on top of it. And I believe they were on the taxi home from a rave or something. And they were tripping hard, like super hard. I think they had 400 milligrams of MDMA. So it possibly even metabolized into MDA in the body, which makes the MDMA experience, well, something else completely different. It's where it becomes hallucinogenic. And then with the ketamine on top, he said he started seeing his friends like dying and rotting, and he felt like he entered a new torturous plane of existence, which was obviously extremely shocking for the lad because I assume it was a guy, because yeah, it's like the last thing you want to see when you're on such a euphoric chemical. But it just shows you just how bizarre things can get when you mix substances together. It can really just take a complete different route. Like I say, you're messing around with some super profound stuff. So basically, don't mess around with it. Treat it with respect, and it'll treat you with respect if you're lucky. There is an element of luck to psychedelics as well. You could have all the best trips in the world. I've always had a great 2CB trips all the time. That's like my go-to substance, and I've never had a bad trip on it ever. On the only other time that happened was when I mixed a bit of ketamine in, and I started having too much dissociation mixed with psychedelia that really quite tripped me out in the moment at this festival, and that wasn't particularly nice, but it didn't really throw me off that much. But it just shows you that even with a substance you're super similar with, I might take 2CB again in the future, and it could just literally just go to shit. So there is almost an element of maybe not even luck, just it's unpredictability, really, isn't it? So I believe I've gone on for far too long, but look forward to some more interesting reports coming up to Christmas. I hope you've been enjoying the more positive experiences. I told you I'd be doing them, although I do like to do the negative ones as well. Well, not even negative ones, just the dark ones. There's always usually at the end of these dark trip reports, there's always some lesson to be learned. That's why I think there's value again in all experience. So, yep, look forward to more of them, and also look forward to some experimental content in the future regarding trip reports. I think I might feature that as maybe a Christmas or New Year's gift to you guys, so we might be taking the visuals up a notch. I know you guys find the visuals I use really relaxing. I love using the ambient gaming footage, and at the minute just using these World of Warcraft walkabouts. So I'm going to keep experimenting with the visuals, see what works. I like to switch things up, as you know. If you've been following me for ages, the channel's morphed and metamorphosized over the years. And yeah, thank you for anyone who's stuck about since the beginning, and big thanks to anyone who's actually stuck about since literally the beginning, when I started my channel in 2009. Imagine if there's someone there, imagine if there's someone still there from 2009 still watching this, seeing the channel go through so many different arcs and phases. I'm sure there's many people who are still here from the Attack on Titan Abridged days, which is when the channel really popped off. So weird. The trajectory of this channel is just so bizarre. It's just like literally just started off making Let's Plays, then I made a bridge series, Attack on Titan Abridged exploded for the time it was active. I let the channel go. I came back with psychedelic content. We've had another resurgence. What's next? Who knows? I have no idea.
But one day it's gonna get so weird, people are gonna start talking about Vivec.
Well, let's hope. But yep. And we're rambling once more, so hope you're having a good day or night, and I'll see you on the other side.